Back in the day, it was always a gamble trying to figure out what game to buy for your brand new Nintendo Entertainment System. We didn't have the internet, and Nintendo Power wouldn't arrive until 1988. Luckily, there was a few gaming companies out there that had the backs of all these 80s kids. One of those companies is Konami, coming up on the Big Retro Show. The 80s and 90s were great times to be a kid. Join me as I dive into the world of movies, music, video games and toys, and explore what made these decades so great. This is the Big Retro Show. What's up, everybody? This is Los, and this is a Big Retro Show. Today on the Big Retro Show, we're talking about one of my favorite game publishers for the Nintendo Entertainment System. That's right, we're talking about Konami. Now, these guys never seem to make a bad game. Now, sure, there were some iffy titles in there, and I'm talking to you, Top Gun. But for the most part, if you were a kid and you had a choice to make, a very important decision back then, and you wanted to buy a Nintendo game, you knew that buying a Konami game would be a safe bet. So today on the Big Retro Show, I'm talking about some of my favorite games made by Konami for the Nintendo Entertainment System. So, here we go. During the 80s, there was nothing more American than fighting Russians. Rocky fought Ivan Drago, Rambo fought all the Russians in Rambo First Blood Part 2, and the Wolverines fought both the Russians and the Cubans in the classic film Red Dawn. Konami was also fighting Russians in Russian Attack. Russian Attack, spelled R-U-S-H-N-A-T-T-A-C-K, was a port of a very popular Konami arcade game. The mission was to infiltrate the Russian base and to destroy the enemy. You were parachuted into the base with only a knife. The more Russians you killed, the better your weapons got. Why you're bringing just a knife into a Russian base is anyone's guess. But hey, this was Nintendo, and it was the 80s. If Rambo could do it, so could you. I guess the appeal of this game, for me at least, was that it was a port of the arcade game of the same name. I used to play this arcade game quite frequently when I would visit the arcades. And to have it on a home console system like the Nintendo was really a treat. I love the sound of the bazooka when you fire it and it kills everyone in its path. I also love the graphics of this game. The graphics were excellent for the time. It really showcased the power of what the Nintendo Entertainment System could do. The game was difficult, but you could beat it. And that was also why I liked this game so much. I really liked stabbing the guys in midair as they tried to jump kick me. There was something just so very satisfying about that. The bosses in this game weren't too difficult. What made this game challenging were the one-hit deaths. No video about Konami would be complete without talking about Castlevania. Now, I have to admit, I was a Sega fanboy. I fell head over heels for the Sega Master System. But I had a lot of friends who had the Nintendo, and they had Castlevania, so I was often at their house playing this awesome game. I'd have to say that Castlevania was one of the games that literally forced me to buy a Nintendo Entertainment System. For me, the adventure began right on the cover of the game, which depicts Simon Belmont, the hero of a Castlevania, who's ready to storm Dracula's castle. What made this game so great were the weapons. You start off with a whip, and then you can quickly upgrade it to a Morning Star, which has better reach than the whip and is more powerful. This game was one of the first games to introduce you to the sub-weapons. The very first weapon that you found was a dagger, but the most highly sought after weapon was, of course, the boomerang. Some people say it's a cross, but I always grew up thinking it was a boomerang. Another great aspect of this game is that it's set in Transylvania. The enemies are what you would expect to be inside of Dracula's castle. You fight bats, zombies, mummies, medusas. You fight creatures from the Black Lagoon. They were all there in this game. It added a lot to the ambiance of the game and made you feel like you were really in Transylvania fighting Dracula's minions. Another great aspect of this game was the life bar. No longer did you have to endure one-hit kills, you actually had a fighting chance against Dracula and his evil henchmen. And now we take a look at the game that defined the run-and-gun genre. That's right, this is Contra. This is also the game that gave rise to the famous Konami code, which was up, down, left, right, BA, start. This is a code that gave you 30 men that you could use to try to beat the game. The weapons of this game were definitely the standouts, with the spread gun being the most sought after and the most powerful. If you were close enough to a target, it didn't take long for the spread gun to completely obliterate it. Another fun aspect of this game was the ability to play with another player. The messed up part about that though is if your friend wasn't good at the game and kept dying, they could steal your half of the 30 men simply by pressing any of the buttons. It made for some interesting fights between friends back in the day. Another cool aspect of the game was that it too was a port of the arcade game of the same name. However, I think that this home console version of Contra was far superior than the arcade version, and I played them both. The sounds, music, and graphics of this game were all state-of-the-art for the time on the Nintendo. And yes, this game also received a sequel called Super C, and that one was also fun. But again, I'm only mentioning Contra because this is the game that really brought me into the Nintendo Entertainment System world. Up next, let's talk about some Jackal. Jackal was an overhead shooter that was popular in the arcades and was ported over by Konami to the Nintendo Entertainment System. Your job was to rescue POWs that were captured behind enemy lines using a jeep that was armed with a machine gun and some grenades. As you progressed through the game and you rescued certain POWs, your weapons would grow stronger and you were armed with a rocket launcher that would cause spread damage when you fired it. The game wasn't too challenging and could be beat on a Saturday afternoon, and on top of that, you could recruit a friend if you had one to play alongside you. Let's talk some sports games. Today, sports games get a bad rap, but back in the day, we loved them. One of the titles that my friends and I used to love playing was Double Dribble. There was nothing better than getting the slam dunk animation while playing this game and screaming at your friend, "Booyah!" in your face. Double Dribble had a lot of little details that we appreciated back in the day. One of those was the game selection screen, which was pretty cool. It's the little things that added to the overall production value of the game. And yes, this too was another port of the arcade game of the same name. There was a certain spot on the court that if you shot from, you would always hit a three-pointer. Next up, we talk about Blades of Steel. Blades of Steel was to hockey as Double Dribble was to basketball. They both had a similar look and feel, except with Blades of Steel, it was on an ice rink. I think one of the best aspects of this game was the ability to fight. We used to love fighting each other in this game. Scoring in this game was rather difficult, and while I was recording footage for this game, I had problems scoring against the computer. The computer, on the other hand, had no problem scoring over me. It was good times. Now we talk about one of my favorite sports games on the Nintendo Entertainment System. It's called Track and Field 2. Track and Field 2 had so many great events. Each one was a little mini game on its own. It was an Olympic game that you could choose the country that you wanted to compete under and compete against other countries throughout the world. One of my favorite events in Track and Field 2 was the triple jump. One of the things that I didn't like about this game is that if you didn't have a turbo controller, like the NES Advantage or the NES Max, it was rather hard winning at any of the events. But other than that, this is one of Konami's most solid titles for the Nintendo. You could probably pick it up really cheap right now online and introduce it to anyone who hasn't had the opportunity to play it. Up next, we look at Gradius. This was another game that took advantage of the Konami code, but you didn't get 30 men when you entered it. You got upgraded weapons. This was one of the very first games that I've ever played on the Nintendo, and it didn't disappoint. The weapon upgrades to the ship really shifted the balance of power in the game, and made it easier for you to destroy the aliens on this planet. While this was a single player game, it was still fun, and I spent many hours in my youth playing it. A spin-off to Gradius came to the Nintendo in the form of Life Force, also known as Salamander in Japan. This game borrowed heavily from Gradius, but in many ways was far superior. The game allowed you to upgrade your ship with several weapons including missiles, multiples, a laser cannon, and a ripple gun. The setting for this game always creeped me out. It was like you had to destroy these tissues and this brain in the very first stage of the game. Another cool aspect of the game was the mixture of side-scrolling and overhead-scrolling levels. I had never seen that before in a game, and I thought that was pretty cool. This game was one of the most difficult ones on the Nintendo. Luckily for us, the Konami code allowed us to get 30 men to try to beat the game. Another cool thing about the game was that it allowed you to play 2 players simultaneously, which was always a benefit back in the day. So these are my favorite games for the Nintendo published by Konami, but I would be remiss to not discuss Ultra Games as well. Ultra Games was a spin-off company that Konami used to use to overstep the weird rules that Nintendo had about publishers publishing more than 5 games per year. With Ultra Games, Konami could publish up to 10 titles per year. So here are some of my favorite games released under the Ultra Games brand. And that's going to do it for the Big Retro Show today, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know what your favorite Konami games are in the comments below. There are so many of them, and I couldn't possibly fit them all in there. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and click on the notification bell so that you get an alert whenever I upload a new video. Also, look for me on Twitter and Facebook. I love to connect with you guys on social media, my fellow Nintendo Konami fans out there. And until the next one, I will see you on the Big Retro Show.